dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yup, what's good, original crew, man? We're back, baby. We have top 2 stories that sound fake but are 100% true. Episode 31. Top 2 stories that sound fake but are 100% true. I don't know, man. We've been doing a lot of stories that sound fake but are true lately. So, with that being said, before we get into it, make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go. If you want to first support, all you got to do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's visuals.
Like it with a thumbs up.
But, hey, let's hop into it, y'all. Let's see what Ballen got cooked up for us this week. Hopefully, we can enjoy, sit back and relax and have a good time. If you're new, or if you haven't already and you're always coming back for more, just hit the subscribe button, man. Join the ride, man. Also, especially those who like to be introduced to new content, to like to laugh, to have fun. Hey, some of the comedy reactions might be coming back. Hey, y'all stay tuned, man. But you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go. Let's check it out. Let's see what it's about, man.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today I'm going to share 2 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button leaves their phone out unattended, go ahead and pick it up and spam passwords over and over again until it locks them out of their phone for a week. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. At around 8 p.m. on December 16th, 2023, a 31-year-old man named Nestor Flores was driving down a highway just outside of Dallas, Texas, with both his hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. Nestor was very stressed out on this ride. All he wanted to do was get home because he was worried that on this ride, he might get pulled over by police. I mean, this was a route he had driven a bunch, and he knew there were loads of state troopers that patrolled the area. And from his perspective, it seemed like they kind of pulled people over all the time. And Nestor had spent the night out with a couple of friends, and he had had a couple of drinks. You know, he didn't feel he had had too much to where he couldn't drive. But he knew if he did get pulled over, he could be in trouble. And then on top of that, in the back of Nestor's mind was the fact that he had had a couple of minor run-ins with the law over the past couple of years. And so he kind of had this fear of police already. And also, Nestor was not born in America. And so he was worried that on top of all that, if he got pulled over, he could risk being deported. And so on whole, Nestor just does not want to see any police officer. He just wants to get home and go to bed. And so as Nestor is doing his best to not draw any suspicion to himself and is trying to follow all the rules of the road, he decides to have a sip of his Diet Coke. And his Diet Coke was right in the middle console. And so as he's driving eyes straight ahead, he reaches down and he grabs the Coke, he pulls it up, he uncaps it, takes a sip. But then as he puts the drink back down, again, he's keeping his eyes on the road, he hits something with the drink. And he feels the drink slosh out of his cup and it hits his hand. And instinctively, he took his eyes off the road and looked down at the Coke, and he managed to put the drink back in its cup holder. And then when he brought his eyes back to the road, there was a deer in the middle of the road. He was too close to swerve out of the way, and so at full speed he smashes into this deer. The deer hits his front windshield and basically caves in the passenger side windshield and flips up and over the back of his car. And Nestor amazingly was composed enough to not swerve wildly post-impact, because he knew if he did that he could run into oncoming traffic or something. And so he just kept on going straight and gradually slowed down and pulled off the side of the road. And as he did, he looked over his shoulder, seeing if this deer was basically lying in the road, or even worse, maybe it hit some other car. But when he looked over his shoulder, the road was clear. There was no deer. Now, even though Nestor was obviously very shaken up at this point, I mean, he just had this horrible car accident with this deer, and he's already on edge about getting pulled over by police. But for the moment, it was just peaceful on the highway. No cops were coming up to him, and he's pulled over to the side. Physically he was okay. It seemed like the deer was okay. It clearly ran off the road or something. And there was damage to his car. I mean, the deer really smashed in the front of his car, and the windshield, especially on the passenger side, was basically caved in. But Nestor was able to see through his side of the windshield, and when he put the car back in drive and hit the gas, the car seemed to drive just fine. And so even though Nestor felt kind of bad that he had smashed this deer, he thought, what am I going to do? Go find the deer and make sure it's okay? Like, he can't really do anything. It's nighttime. And so he made the decision that, nobody saw this and it seems like everything's okay. So I'm just going to drive home and I'll take care of my car tomorrow. But after driving 38 more miles from the impact site, Nestor's car began making this horrible rattling sound from the engine, and also smoke began to billow up out of the front of his car. And so Nestor knew, this is so conspicuous, he's gonna get pulled over if he doesn't stop. And so feeling really annoyed, because he was actually pretty close to home at this point, Nestor pulled off the highway and came to a stop in a parking lot of a fast food restaurant. And so at first, all Nestor did was just turn off his car and wait for a couple of minutes in hopes that, that would be enough to cure his car. But after a couple of minutes, the smoke continued to billow out of his car, and then when he tried to turn it back on again, the car simply wouldn't start. And so at this point, Nestor knew he had to call a tow truck. But when he reached for his phone was dead, and he didn't have a phone charger in his car, and so he's like, great, I can't even call a tow truck. But then he looked up and saw the fast food restaurant was open, and he decided he would just go in there, and he would ask one of them if they had a charger. So Nestor gets out of his smoking car, he walks into the restaurant, he goes up to the counter, and he asks the person behind the counter, like, hey, my phone's dead, do you have a charger? Do you mind charging my phone? But the employee, they didn't say anything back to Nestor. They just stood there with their mouths open and their eyes wide, staring at Nestor, like they couldn't believe what they were looking at. And so Nestor's thinking, like, what's wrong with this person? Hey, do you have a charger or not?
They want the antlers or something? No, I ain't. Or is something wrong?
Something has to be wrong, and he's like in some type of yeah.
And the employee, who by this point is pale as a ghost, just shook their head at Nestor, like, no, they don't have a charger. And then they just stood there, still staring at Nestor. And so now Nestor is genuinely just furious. I mean, the whole night has completely derailed here. All he wanted to do was get home, and it's like one horrible thing happens after another. And so Nestor was just like, okay, fine. And he turned around and he left the restaurant and went back to his car, thinking maybe if I search the whole vehicle, there's bound to be a charger in there somewhere. And so Nestor gets back into his car, he climbs into the driver's seat, he shuts the door, and as he begins looking around his car for this charger, he begins to feel really sleepy. And actually, he eventually just kind of leans forward and falls asleep in his car. More than 2 hours later, Nestor woke up to the sound of somebody tapping on his window. And so Nestor groggily turned and looked, and it was like the worst case scenario. It was a police officer who was shining his flashlight into the vehicle, clearly gesturing for Nestor to roll his window down. And so Nestor was totally compliant. He rolled the window down and he looked at the officer, and before Nestor could even say anything, the officer said, "Get out of the car." So Nestor, he gets out of the car and he's thinking to himself, why is he acting so aggressively towards me? Like, what have I done here? And so Nestor, he gets out of the car, and again, before Nestor can ask any questions, the officer just says to Nestor, "What happened tonight? Like, what's going on here?" And so Nestor, he knows his car is jacked up, and here he is sleeping in the parking lot. And so he turns to the officer and begins explaining the deer story. He was driving down the road, he hits this deer, it went over the top, he didn't see it, he didn't report it. And as he's telling the officer this, he's thinking, oh my gosh, like, is there a law? Like, if you hit a deer, are you supposed to report it? Is that what's going on? Maybe the deer did die, and it was in the middle of the road, and somebody saw his license plate, and now the cop was here. And so Nestor began to panic, trying to explain the logic behind leaving the deer, and how sorry he was, he should have stopped, he should have called the police. But the officer finally just put up his hand, telling Nestor to stop talking, and then the officer took his flashlight and he shined it past Nestor at his car. And when the officer did that, the officer immediately grabbed his radio and began barking orders into it, saying he needed backup. And so Nestor's like, what is going on here? Like, this whole night has been such a disaster. Like, what did I do? And so Nestor, he turned to see what the cop was looking at on his car that would elicit such a big response from him. And when he looked at the passenger seat of his car, where the cop's light was now shining, Nestor froze for a second and then just started to scream. It would turn out that even though Nestor believed he had only had, a few drinks and he was okay to drive, the reality was he was completely annihilated drunk and should never have been behind the wheel. And when he was driving on the highway, anxiously trying to get home, well, he didn't hit a deer. He hit a 45-year-old pedestrian named Terry Ivory.
I knew it. When I paused and I said, no. I figured that's what happened. He swerved and hit him. He probably was walking. Oh, man, bro.
And he hit this guy with so much force that Terry went through the windshield on the passenger side and then landed in the passenger seat, minus one leg, which had been severed on impact. And then Terry's dead body sat there in the passenger seat with Nestor having no idea. He thinks there's a deer back there, but there was never a deer. There's just a dead guy next to him. And Nestor just drove 40 more miles with Terry's dead body next to him. And then when Nestor's car began to smoke and make noises, he pulled off the highway to that fast food restaurant parking lot. And then when he went inside the restaurant to try to get a phone charger, the reason that employee was so shocked to see Nestor and could basically not even speak when Nestor was trying to talk to them was because Nestor was covered practically head to toe in blood, Terry's blood. Now, it's not entirely clear why that employee did not immediately call police, but, after Nestor left the restaurant, went back to his car, and fell asleep, during the time Nestor was sleeping, someone inside the restaurant did call the police.
This the car. You see the damage? It ain't deer damage. I know what deer damage looks like. Wow.
And that's why they showed up and knocked on Nestor's glass. Nestor was charged with collision involving death in December of 2023. However, his case has not yet been adjudicated.
Wow. That is fucking sad, bro. And you know when you had enough. You know you had enough drinks. You know what I'm saying?
You done had too many.
Too many.
Too many. Honestly,
you chose to get behind that wheel.
You shouldn't even. If you know you about to go out and party or something, and you about to be doing, have a designated driver.
And I ain't gonna.
Don't drive. When was this? Call an Uber or something.
Last year. And it's 6 months ago. Almost December of last year.
Like, there's options. You have options, and driving drunk driving is not one of them.
You're dead intoxicated. You don't even realize there's a dead body in the car. One, you're that drunk where you still decided after the fact. And to be completely honest, how do we even know because obviously Ballen got the case, right? Like looked at the case and got the case notes, right? Because this is a fairly new case. How do we even know Nessa's story is true? That, I thought I had hit a deer. You probably knew you had hit a human. Right? You probably knew, hey, let me call somebody but you have had you're having brain trauma from the accident that you're not even because you if you did search the car, how don't you realize there's a body in the car? There's no way you don't notice that. I have a whole human body in the. That individual wasn't there at first?
I don't know. You know how I feel about drunk drivers. I'm just kind of like.
Yeah.
It just hit me a little different. But he probably was that intoxicated where for him to pass out 2 hours later, he probably was that intoxicated. And then from the impact and stuff, and then in shock. And
that's why he passed out. It wasn't even head trauma. He was that damn drunk.
Yeah, to not know he covered in blood and go into.
But look where he's parked at, though. He's parked because this is the crime scene, and 9 times out of 10 they didn't move the car. They didn't move the car because once we moved the car, we moved this crime scene.
But he's not even in the parking spot correctly. He just pulled up, popped out.
And you parked all the way in the far back. Because the reason why I said. If you would have parked up here because even if a tow truck comes see you, it's at night.
So I wonder if you did make it home, was able to get in the house, slept it off, got up the next day. You would have had
somebody help you figure out.
And you seen that he was in the passenger side of your car, what would you have done? What would you have done?
Personally, I think he knew. I think he was trying to, but he was so intoxicated he couldn't.
Well, let's take out. I'm just taking out the fact that if he knew or not, because he was intoxicated. I'm saying once you had went home and sobered up, and you got up the next day and seen that he was, if you made it home and seen that he was deceased in your car on the passenger, what would you have done? Would you have called authorities? Would you have tried to do something, cover it up? What would you have done? I really would like to know. Like, I am glad that his car did stall out and then he had to pull up and he went in and they was able to call and someone was able to come out, because that is so sad.
And when did the interview for the offense happen? Did it happen immediately, or did y'all allow him to sober up a little bit and then interview him and see what happened? You know what I'm saying? Interrogation, I mean.
Well, I guess as far as the initial thing with him wanting to like tell about the deer store, it seemed as though it was on the scene for him to stop him and be like, and then for him to look over and then whatever. So I don't know, man. That's sad though. Rest in peace.
Facts, man. Let it go.
Nestor was charged with collision involving death in December of 2023. However, his case has not yet been adjudicated. On the afternoon of December 15th, 1997, a brand new mother named Luz Cuevas sat on her couch in her little apartment in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, cradling her beautiful 10-day-old baby girl, who she had named Delamar Vera. And in the room with Luz and her daughter were some members of Luz's extended family who had come over to meet the baby. And so for about an hour, the family all took turns, holding the baby and complimenting how cute her little dimples looked. And then eventually the baby started to get fussy, at which point Luz said she was going to take her upstairs and put her to bed. And so Luz brought Delamar upstairs to her nursery, and she put the baby down in her crib, and she stayed with her for a bit until Delamar finally had kind of dozed off to sleep. And so after being sure that her daughter wasn't going to stir, Luz got up and she began making her way towards the door, and right before she left, she made sure to plug in the space heater for her daughter's room to make sure it would stay warm enough while her daughter slept. And then after that, she left the room, shut the nursery door, and went back downstairs to rejoin her family. Luz's family didn't stick around much longer after Luz came downstairs, and after they were all gone, Luz realized she was totally exhausted and her daughter was still fast asleep upstairs, and so Luz decided she would also lie down and try to take a nap herself. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she heard this loud thud sound coming from the second floor. And it sounded like something really heavy had smashed into the ground. And she's thinking, her daughter's up there. Could that be her daughter somehow falling out of the crib or something? And so Luz jumped up, sprinted upstairs. And as she looked down the hall, she could clearly see there was black smoke billowing out of her daughter's nursery. And so Luz charges down the hall. She opens up the door and she looks into her daughter's room, and it's completely engulfed in flames. I mean, everything is on fire, but it's her baby girl in there. And so without any hesitation, Luz charges into the inferno. But when she gets up to the crib, the crib is so completely on fire that when she looks in, she can't even see her daughter. And so in a craze, she begins looking around the room thinking, maybe my daughter did fall out of the crib and she's somewhere else in the room, but everything is on fire. She can't see anything. And so as Luz is literally catching on fire and breathing in all the smoke, she's screaming for her daughter. And then a couple of minutes later, firefighters burst into the door and they literally drag Luz out of the nursery. She hasn't found her daughter. She's screaming, where's my baby? But the firefighters, they bring her outside. And just a couple of minutes later, they were able to extinguish this blaze. And after they came out of the house again, they found Luz, who had all these terrible burns in her body, and she's totally messed up from this fire. And they tell her that, unfortunately, her daughter was dead. After Delamar's death, Luz's life completely fell apart. I mean, the grief was so immense. It was like she could no longer function in society. I mean, she actually retracted from the world, stopped interacting with people, didn't see her family. She wound up getting a divorce from her husband just over the grief and the sadness of losing this child. I mean, it was like her life basically ended when her daughter's life ended. But on top of that, Luz also felt this incredible sense of guilt because after the fire, the investigators told her that the cause of the fire, although not conclusive, was very likely from that space heater she had plugged in right before she had left the room. And so, of course, Luce is feeling this incredible burden for having potentially killed her daughter, but also she just began to obsess over the details because, again, it wasn't conclusive that it was the space heater. That was their best guess as to what caused the fire. And so Luce began to wonder, was it something else? Was it preventable? What was it? Basically, Luce became completely obsessed with what happened to her daughter. It was like the only thing she ever thought of for years. Fast forward to January 24th, 2004, so 6 years after the fire. And on this day, Luce was invited to a family party. There was a get-together, and, Luce basically never went to any family function or really left her house much at all. But for some reason, on this day, she decided to go out. And so she goes to this party, and when she gets there, remember, Luce has basically been a recluse for the past 6 years. And so she's not going to immediately start socializing. And so instead, she just goes in the house and kind of finds a spot in the back, kind of away from everybody else who's chatting, and just stands there, kind of people watching. And as she's doing that, something catches her attention off to the side. And when she turns to look at it and sees what it is, she immediately just freezes. 3 days later...
What you do that for? What you do that for?
I'm just waiting. No,
okay.
I'm literally just like...
Because some came across your mind. Remember it or write it down, take a picture.
Let me write it down so y'all won't think I'm lying if it is what I'm thinking. Because I am thinking something.
Turns to look at it and sees what it is, she immediately just freezes. 3 days later, Luce walked into the office of a local state legislator, and after saying hello, she sat down, reached into her purse, and pulled out a little plastic bag that contained a folded up napkin. And she slid it across the table to the legislator. And so he picked up the bag and stared at it inquisitively as Luce dove into this wild explanation about what was in this bag and why she was here. And at the end of this totally off-the-wall, insane-sounding story, the legislator was left just kind of staring at Luce and looking back at the bag in total shock. And then finally, after a couple of moments of silence, the legislator just said, "Okay, yeah, I'll see what I can do." It would turn out the fire was not caused by the space heater that Luce had plugged in right before she left her daughter's room. Instead, police believe after Luce came downstairs and tried to take a nap, somebody broke into her apartment, went into the nursery, and set the fire on purpose, but not before abducting the baby. And that person was one of Luce's own family members who had been at her apartment that day.
Yeah.
Because they never said... Because what was it? They never came. That's why you do got to listen to Ballen. Because he never said they brought the baby out.
He just said that the firefighters said that the baby didn't make it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, did you see something?
Did you physically see a baby?
Did someone possibly replace the baby with something or someone, or which is so weird and bizarre to even think that. But I did.
Before you elaborate.
Was one of Luce's own family members who had been at her apartment that day celebrating the birth of Della Marvera. It was Luce's husband's cousin, Carolyn Correa. And in fact, on this same day, before the fire and before the abduction, Carolyn made a point to announce to the whole family that she was pregnant, even though she wasn't. It was just going to be her cover story for why she suddenly had this brand new baby. 6 years later, when Luce was at that family party, well, the thing that caught her attention on the other side of the room was her daughter. She literally saw her daughter, and even though she hadn't seen her in 6 years, she instantly knew it was her because of her distinctive dimples. Now, Luce knew she couldn't just suddenly yell out, "That's my daughter!"
Right.
So instead, she came up with this plan. She walked up to the girl and very discreetly said, "Hey, honey, I think you got some gum in your hair." And so as she pretended to pull gum out of the child's hair, she carefully plucked a few strands and put them inside of a napkin and put it inside of her pocket. And then 3 days later, she brought that hair inside of that plastic baggie and she gave it to the legislator and basically said, "Here's what I think happened. I think she stole my kid. Can you test it for DNA to prove that girl is my daughter?" And the legislator was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." And lo and behold, that hair would prove that girl at the party was her daughter. Wow. She did not die in that fire.
Wow.
Carolyn Correa was sentenced to 9 to 30 years in prison for abduction.
Wow.
She originally had an arson charge against her as well, but investigators could not actually prove how the fire started, and so they ultimately dropped those charges. Officials also launched an inquiry into how the fire department had handled the original investigation, because Luce had tried to convince fire officials that, maybe her daughter had not died in the blaze. Maybe she was just missing, because when Luce went into the nursery, she claimed she couldn't even find her daughter. But investigators had told her that the fire had burned so hot that basically her daughter had been totally incinerated, and that's why
See, quit looking at me. Look at the thing.
told her that the fire had burned so hot that basically her daughter had been totally incinerated, and that's why she couldn't find her. In the end, though, because of her refusal to ever give up, Luce was ultimately reunited with her daughter, Delamar.
Ain't no love like a mother's love, bro. A mother would go to the ends of the world for her damn daughter. Cause it was her husband's what? Cousin,
bro.
You fuck ass sicko, bro.
Cause I'm like, yeah, cause he did say that was like, unfortunately, the baby, whatever. But y'all never found the baby.
Cause what y'all think? Come on now.
Like y'all would have found some type of remains.
Yes.
Something. They would have been destroyed, but something. Come on, let's be.
It was been some ashes or something.
I'm so glad that she did decide to go to the party because she been cut off from the work. Like
That's
she
why she heard the thump. She heard the thump because, and the fire started and it engulfed too fast for it to have been. Wow. Because even if it was,
cousin ever even leave? Like I know all the other family.
What floor was it on too?
Yeah, like I have so many. That's so crazy.
Like, I know she said upstairs.
Baby?
And typically with a lot of those, they got the little fire escape on the side, like more like bigger cities and stuff.
The husband don't go and visit the cousin. You didn't know that was your baby? Well, the ex-husband because they had got a divorce. That's
telling though.
That's weird to me. That's crazy.
That's more than weird to me though.
But yes, I'm so glad she decided to go to the party, the little gathering, and she she noticed her child. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad she went up and thought of let me get some as crazy as it may sound, because some people are like, okay, you know you a little tripping, you've been a little isolated from everybody, you going through whatever. No, she know her child.
That's crazy. And
bro.
Good thing those distinctive marks was there too,
like her the dimples and stuff. Yeah. Or just she looks the same.
We also could have went out the birthmark. That's why it's good to know your child's birthmark too.
And even though she's older, she still looked like her baby picture. Like she so adorable. But yeah, I'm so glad she was able to be reunited with her child.
Damn, that is crazy, bro. But like you said, because I said this at one point, I was thinking, I was like, because somebody had came back in the house. It came across my mind and went.
I didn't even think I was just like, that's her child. She seen her child, but I didn't think who it was or someone I don't know. I just didn't even think about that. I just she saw her child.
I wonder what made her even go because she had to have some kind of. Was it the child's birthday party? Then she had known that a couple months later, the woman popped up and said, "Hey, I got a baby," but the baby was bigger than what I'm saying, bigger than just a newborn baby. Was it the child's birthday party? And she looked at the flyer or something and said, "Those dimples." Because you get what I'm saying. Because she's been excluded from y'all. What made her even go to the gathering? I don't know if it was the birthday party. What made her go to the gathering and even just sit back and watch? Because you don't just randomly go after being away
for 6 years
and 6 years and be like, okay, and you a bold motherfucker for inviting her, allowing her to come to the joint anyway.
What, you thought she probably wasn't gonna recognize her daughter? She looks like her baby pictures to me.
You
it's
bold.
My child. I know what my child look like. I don't care if I haven't seen her in 6 years.
You a bold motherfucker. That's all I got to say, man. But y'all spam us up, man. Y'all let us know y'all thoughts about it. This was actually a good one, though.
Yeah, most definitely.
But let us know y'all thoughts and opinions about it for us down below, man. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is.
Sierra Nicole.
We are.
Kid and C.
We out.
Go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.